Hi there. Glad you're here. Today's story is one of the strangest and most unsettling chapters in the long history of secretive belief systems. It's a story that mixes space, death, transformation, and control. The group we're talking about didn't hide underground in ancient temples or behind closed doors of government chambers. They lived in plain sight, smiled for cameras, bought ads in newspapers, and still most people never really understood what they believed or why so many of them followed it to the end. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time is it there right now. Drop it in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see who's tuning in and from where. The group was called Heaven's Gate. At first glance, it sounded harmless, even hopeful. A path to another world, a gate to a higher level. But what they believed and what they were willing to do because of that belief left a deep mark on modern religious history. They didn't use violence on others, they didn't build an empire, but they followed a vision so specific and so extreme that it ended in one of the largest mass suicides in U.S. history. To understand Heaven's Gate, you have to understand the people who started it. In the early 1970s, Marshall Applewhite was a former music professor from Texas. His life had taken strange turns. He'd been fired from a job after a personal scandal. He'd spent time in psychiatric care. He believed that he had a special connection to something beyond the human world. He met Bonnie Nettles, a nurse and spiritual seeker. She had studied astrology, mysticism, and prophecies. Together, they believed they were chosen for a mission. They started preaching across the country, not in churches, but in living rooms, parks, and small gatherings. They said the world was about to be recycled, that it would be wiped clean, and only those who were ready could escape. How would they escape? Not by being saved in a traditional religious sense, but by leaving their human bodies behind and entering a spacecraft hidden behind a comet. They believed that they were not really human in the way most people think of it. They said they were actually beings from another level of existence, sent here to collect others who were ready to return to that higher level. The body was just a vehicle, like a car. When it breaks down or has served its purpose, you step out of it. They called this exiting the vehicle. In their worldview, death wasn't death. It was a graduation. They saw Earth as a kind of garden where souls were planted, tested, and harvested. But not all souls were ready. Most people, they said, were caught in the traps of materialism, ego, and attachment. These people were not going to make it. Only those who followed the specific teachings of the group and detached from everything worldly could prepare themselves to ascend. That meant cutting ties with family, giving up possessions, and devoting every thought and action to the mission. One of the ways they maintained control was through strict daily routines. They lived communally, often in rented homes. Their schedules were tightly managed. Meals were shared, tasks assigned, voices kept low. Everything was designed to minimize ego, reduce distraction, and erase individual identity. Even names were changed. Members adopted new names with odd-sounding syllables. These weren't just nicknames. They were part of the cleansing. The old self had to be erased before the new self could rise. Over time, their teachings evolved. What began as mystical language started taking on a more technological feel. They talked about spacecrafts, higher-level beings, and non-human intelligence. They said Earth was like a laboratory, a place where souls were developed or discarded. Those who failed to evolve would be replanted or recycled. Those who succeeded would board the ship and move on to the next level. They believed that this next level was real, physical, and accessible, not metaphor, not spirit, an actual place beyond the stars where there was no war, no hunger, no sex, no death. It was a state of existence so refined that human life seemed like a prison by comparison. To prepare, they had to unlearn all human attachments. No romantic love, no families, no personal ambition. Total focus on the mission. Even gender was considered a distraction. Some members went so far as to undergo castration, not out of punishment but out of devotion. They believed it was a way to eliminate sexual temptation and move closer to the next level identity, which they said was genderless. Marshall Applewhite himself, their leader, underwent the procedure. He believed it brought him closer to purity, and several male followers volunteered to do the same. The group maintained a public face that seemed calm and even friendly. They recorded video messages. They created a website, one of the earliest cults to use the internet for outreach. They wrote about their mission clearly, though their ideas seemed strange to most readers. They were not hiding, but few took them seriously. In a world full of unusual beliefs, they blended in just enough to avoid serious attention. Their website talked about the next level in matter-of-fact terms. It described their exit plan, their goals, and why the end of human life was not to be feared. Even today, the site is still online, frozen in time, a quiet digital monument to a group that saw themselves not as lost, but as chosen. Their words are eerie, but calm. Almost gentle. That calmness was part of what made them so convincing to each other. No shouting, no threats, just certainty. Their certainty grew stronger when the Hale-Bopp comet appeared in 1997. Astronomers had been tracking it for a while. It was large and bright, a stunning sight in the night sky. For Heaven's Gate, this was the sign they'd been waiting for. They believed a spacecraft was traveling behind the comet, hidden from human view. That ship was their ride, their window to exit Earth and ascend to the next level, and the window would not stay open long. In the final weeks, they began preparing carefully. They bought matching black clothing, Nike sneakers, armbands. They ate carefully, cleaned their home, and recorded farewell videos. In those videos, members smiled. They looked calm, focused. Some even laughed. They believed they were going home. They didn't see it as death. They saw it as departure. In late March of 1997, the plan was carried out. 39 members, including Applewhite, took a mixture of barbiturates and alcohol, then placed plastic bags over their heads. They died in shifts. The ones who died later covered the others with cloths. When the last group died, no one was left to cover them. Their bodies were found days later, neatly arranged in bunk beds, dressed alike, with no signs of struggle. The discovery shocked the world. News outlets showed the scene again and again. Police entered the house, stunned by how calm and orderly it all was. There was no chaos, no signs of a fight, just rows of people who had decided, together, to leave life behind. For most viewers, the question wasn't just why they died, it was how they could believe something so strange with so much certainty. This is where the deeper story begins. Because Heaven's Gate didn't begin as a suicide cult. It began as a search for truth, identity, and meaning. Most of its members were not unstable. Many were intelligent, creative, and kind. What drew them in wasn't madness. It was the promise of clarity. The promise that life had a deeper purpose and that someone had finally figured it out. Applewhite and Nettles gave their followers something they couldn't find elsewhere, a structure for life that explained everything. Where they came from, why they were here, what happened after death. The teachings didn't need to sound logical to outsiders, they only needed to feel complete to the people inside. When you give people a system that answers every question, it becomes hard to let it go, even when the answers seem strange. That's why so many stayed for years. Through moves, separations, and silence from the outside world, they found peace in routine, purpose in discipline, and belonging in their group identity. They weren't just waiting for a spaceship. They were building a life where doubt had no room to grow. The strangest part of the Heaven's Gate story isn't just the belief in aliens or comets. It's how ordinary people gave up everything because they believed something unusual, and how that belief gave them peace. even as it took them to their deaths. They didn't think they were being tricked. They didn't feel afraid. They thought they were going home. After the group's deaths, the world moved on. But traces of Heaven's Gate remain. Their website is still online, maintained by former members who didn't join the final exit. Their writings are still accessible. Their videos still play. You can watch them speak about their mission in soft, even voices. The calmness in their words is what disturbs most people, because it doesn't sound like fear. It sounds like devotion. In some ways, the Heaven's Gate cult reflects a pattern seen in other secretive groups. The creation of a small, isolated world with its own rules. A rejection of outside logic. A focus on purity, transformation, and absolute obedience. Other groups in history have followed similar paths, but what makes Heaven's Gate unusual is how much they believed in something that sounded more like science fiction than religion. They didn't see themselves as rebels or radicals. They saw themselves as chosen travelers, preparing for a journey that others couldn't understand. Their exit was not meant as a protest. It was an act of loyalty to a truth they believed they had found. They thought they were leaving a dying world and stepping into a better one. The story of Heaven's Gate raises questions that go far beyond one cult. It touches on how people search for meaning, how belief systems take hold, and how far people will go when they think they've found ultimate truth. In a world full of uncertainty, groups like this offer a kind of order, a total vision of life and death. And for some, that certainty becomes more valuable than anything else. Long after the cameras left and the headlines faded, the lessons remained about how powerful belief can be, about how the need to belong can override logic, and how sometimes the strangest beliefs are followed not by the lost, but by those searching for something so deeply they no longer care how strange the answers sound.